welcome to Storyteller Showcase. I'm your host, Mark, and today we have John Petrik. And John tells stories and creates stories like this one in many different genres, and he's told in many different venues and locations. And I'm very happy to introduce to you right now with a historical story, John Petrik.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, this story is true. Except I am portraying General Sherman, so that part is not true. I am William Tecumseh Sherman, General-in-Chief, United States Army. I'm happy to be in Sacramento today. Many of you have probably come to hear stories of our victories in the War of Rebellion, some call the Civil War. Our Army of the West succeeded in splitting the rebels in three by first capturing Vicksburg, then Jackson, then Atlanta, then the March to the Sea, then north through the Carolinas to isolate General Lee between Grant's forces and mine. I love to tell the stories of the fine men of the Army of the West, the greatest fighting force there is. And if there are any of you out there in the audience today that are part of my army, I salute you. But this trip to California has prompted some different memories from 35 years ago when I was first posted to California as a young lieutenant. Our ship left New York in July of '46, bound for California to fight the Mexican War. We went around the tip of South America, and because of bad weather, it took 190 days to get to Monterey. And when we got there, the fighting was over. Kearny had occupied Los Angeles. I cannot describe my profound disappointment. From age 16, when I entered West Point, I had trained and yearned for the chance to prove my skills and bravery in battle. Many of my classmates got that opportunity. There is only one war per generation, and my war had passed me by. But a soldier must do his duty, and an officer must know the terrain to defend it, to track its enemy. And California was a vast, uncharted wilderness. There was perhaps 20,000 Californios in a few ranches over this area. There was no trade center. In fact, Kearny had to send to Hawaii for provisions and clothing. And so I traveled, I reported, I mapped. I was based in the capital, Monterey. We went south to Los Angeles, and I marched back 40 men over some desolate, dusty, dry, rugged country. I would not have traded that whole area for one county in my beautiful green Ohio. And going north was not much better. The villages were bleak. San Jose was a string of low adobe huts festooned with drying garlic and peppers, and Santa Clara was a dilapidated church surrounded by dry orchards. But the worst was Yerba Buena. A more desolate place I don't know that I've ever seen. It was hurricane winds. The drift sand was so deep, our horses could barely put one foot in front of the other. There was a couple hundred people in a harbor. The harbor master, Folsom, tried to sell me lots in that godforsaken place. As he was acquiring everything he could, I was insulted that he would think me such a fool. But as we know, Yerba Buena became San Francisco, and within 3 years, It was a city of 30,000 people, and Folsom was one of the wealthiest. So, who was the fool? But I will never understand how the leading city in the Pacific ended up at that location. I would have picked Benicia. Well, in the spring of '48, a couple of Americans came to Monterey with a letter from a man named John Sutter. And Sutter had discovered gold along the American River where he was building a sawmill. And he was requesting that we grant him a section of land to keep out squatters. Well, we had no authority to do that, but we laughed because this was 40 miles from the nearest settlement. What were the chances anyone would disturb him? But within weeks, the cry of gold was everywhere, and I was dispatched to investigate. I stopped in San Francisco, and the place was deserted. Everyone had gone to the gold fields. I went from Sutter's Fort up the American River, and the river was lined with miners. The lucky ones were making $1,000 a day. Sometimes they could just reach in the stream and pull out a gold nugget. Even the less lucky ones were making $20 or $30 a day when the average wage was $1. When I went back to Monterey, I said, we need to write the president a letter to tell him about this vast gold deposit in California. And so I was instructed to do that, and it went east with another officer who was going on leave. And in December of '48, President Polk announced the discovery of gold in California, which triggered the California gold rush as a result of my letter. Well, soon there were thousands of people arriving by boat in San Francisco, and they would immediately head for the gold fields, including the crews. By 1850, there were 600 ships abandoned in San Francisco Harbor because there were no crews. Well, we in the Army had the same problem. Our enlisted men made $7 a month. When a new regiment arrived in the spring of 49, half of them immediately deserted for the gold fields. So we officers had to track them down. Well, I knew the terrain best, and I found their camp and arrested them at nightfall and waited hours till someone came to help me out. And I held 22 men for several hours, and only one of those sons of a gun got away. Well, people were arriving not only by boat in the thousands, but there were thousands that were coming over the mountains from the east. And as winter drew near in '49, the people arriving said there were still thousands more behind them, many of them with dying oxen or dwindling supplies. So my general, he bought $100,000 worth of food and supplies, and we ordered men in pack trains into the mountains to help those immigrants, and we got them all down before winter. And by doing that, we saved hundreds, if not thousands, of lives from that Sierra Nevada winter. Well, that was California back then. And I cannot say that when it was time for me to rotate duties in 1850 that I was sorry to leave that. I was looking for some more order and discipline, I guess. But I would return to San Francisco for 5 years in the 50s as a civilian. But I always knew that I was a soldier. And when the War Rebellion came, I was able to get a commission, and I was able to prove to myself and my others that I am, in fact, a soldier. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. And to my brave men of the Army of the West, dismiss!